everybody to our Facebook Live discussion, Navigating Generational Differences in the Volunteer Fire Service, brought to you by the National Volunteer Fire Council. I'm Dr. Candice McDonald, a firefighter, fire inspector, former EMS officer from Ohio, and an adjunct instructor at Eastern Gateway Community College. That's what I do as a volunteer. By day, I work as a federal agent for NASA. So I'm joined today by a great team. We have Jason Decremer, we have Walter Campbell, and joining us soon will be Scott Wilbur. So we're excited to have this group together and to talk about this topic. But I'd like to take a moment to thank all of the emergency services volunteers who make such a difference in their community every day. I don't know where we'd be without them. You know, this is also a week that volunteer departments are engaging with their communities to recruit new members, which is super exciting. A healthy and successful department has members from a variety of generations and backgrounds. This helps to create kind of a mix of established knowledge and innovative ideas, as well as it ensures the department has enough members now and in the future. However, differences among these generations can occur and happen in the form of things like communication, learning styles, perspective, and priorities. And these can kind of lead to misunderstandings that can affect volunteer recruitment and retention. In fact, there was a study that was conducted by the NVFC in 2020, and former volunteers listed that a department atmosphere where members of different generations that don't get along as one of the top reasons that they left their department. So it's important to note that. That's why people are leaving. So in today's conversation, we'll focus on what can be done to encourage understanding and cooperation between members of different generations, and how this can positively impact recruitment and retention. But before we jump into today's discussion, let's take a few minutes for introductions, and I'll turn it over to Jason first.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. Jason Decremer. I'm from the Southbury Volunteer Fire Department in the state of Connecticut. I've been in the fire service for 23, going on 24 years in a couple different departments, last 16, 17 with Southbury, which is a 100% volunteer organization. For the last few years, I've been fortunate enough to be working with the International Association of Fire Chiefs, teaching recruitment and retention classes throughout the country, and getting to hear and see the different issues that volunteer fire departments are facing throughout the country. Generational certainly comes up in most of the places that we go. I'm happy to be here this afternoon to join in a discussion on those issues.
Great. Well, thank you, Jason. And I think wasn't your research for your dissertation was on this topic, like on volunteers, right?
It was specifically on recruiting long-term members. Yes, public service motivation focused. Correct.
Which is super cool because mine was on retention. So it kind of balances each other out. So I can't wait to hear what you have to say today. Walter, if you could just introduce yourself for us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Walter Campbell. I am currently the recruitment and retention strategist with First Arriving. Before I've been with First Arriving for about 7-8 months now. And before that, I was the recruitment and retention coordinator down at the Burtonsville Volunteer Fire Department in Montgomery County in Maryland, where I worked there for 3.5 years. And that was my first introduction into the volunteer fire service. Prior to that, I was an Air Force recruiter, active duty, and enlisted and officer Air Force recruiter. So I did spend 20 years in the Air Force traveling across the country, and ended my career as a recruiter in South Jersey in the Camden, Cherry Hill area. Glad to be here, and just really good topic that a lot of people kind of miss. We focus on recruitment and retention, but specifically having everybody or a collective focusing on all the generations. Really great topic, and I'm glad to be here today.
Well, thank you, Walter, and thank you for your service to our country. I look forward to hearing all of your expertise. And I'm going to turn it over to Scott Wilbur, who will actually be our host for hosting our Q&A questions for our Q&A for our panelists. So, Scott, I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Candice. Scott Wilbur. I've been with the Bronson Fire Department for 22 years, the last 5.5 as chief. I also work as a military contract firefighter for the Grayling Fire Department. Very happy to be here. I think we got a great panel. Should have some very good discussion. I want to thank you all for being here. And I'd like to also thank all the volunteer firefighters, EMS providers, and rescue workers who serve their communities each and every day. Today's discussion will last about an hour, depending on how many questions we receive. I have some questions in front of me already to start the discussion, but we're also taking questions from you, our audience. If you do have any, leave a comment and we'll try to answer it. With that, let's begin. Volunteer emergency responders come from a variety of generations. Baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, and Generation Z are all currently very active in the fire service. What are some of the specific challenges posed by this, and how can these challenges impact volunteer recruitment and retention? Candice, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, great question. So I always go with, the biggest challenge comes from assumptions. The younger generation makes assumptions about the older generation. The older generation makes assumptions about the younger generations. And I'll use this as an example. So I was having a conversation with a seasoned member of the fire service earlier this week, and he said that he was going to the high schools to teach them how to change a tire. And he says, I just can't believe that these kids don't know how to change a tire. And he started to make an assumption. I said, well, let me stop you right there. And I said, first of all, I think it's wonderful that you're teaching them that skill. So thank you for doing that. I said, but I also want to point something out. When we were growing up, and this is going to date several of us on this panel, when we were growing up, we didn't have a cell phone. So if our car broke down, we had to change our own tire. We couldn't pick up the phone. We couldn't call roadside assistance. We couldn't call AAA. We had to either do it ourselves or we had to walk somewhere to knock on someone's door and ask for help. Our youth today, they've never had to go through that. So why would they need to learn how to change a tire when most of them have roadside assistance or AAA? So that's something that they didn't have to learn. So that was kind of an assumption. Another assumption that I hear that the older generation will make towards the younger one is that they don't want to volunteer. They don't want to come. They don't show up. And that isn't true at all, because when we look and we've surveyed some of the younger generation, they have a heart for volunteerism. But what they also have a heart for is their family. So one of the challenges becomes that we force them to pick between their family and the fire service. We have that standard Monday night training night. So they have to pick between little Johnny's soccer game or the fire service. And I always say you're either going to have firefighter guilt or family mom or dad guilt. So, so that's an assumption. Sometimes we make that assumption that they don't want to volunteer. And then the younger generation makes assumptions about the older generation. Oh, they're always trying to tell me what to do. They're trying to tell me what to do and tell me how to do it. It has to be their way. But what they don't always see is that they're trying to pass that knowledge on, because there's been kind of a broken communication system there. So those are some of the challenges that I see.
Perfect. Thank you. Walter, you've got a little different perspective coming through both military and fire service and your work at First Arriving. What can you add to the conversation?
Definitely agree with what Candice was saying is the assumptions, stereotypes, and biases in a nutshell. And so as she was talking about her story, as I was a recruiter in a combination department, there were a lot of members who would say they're always, to new members, they're always on their phone. They're not paying attention. They're always on their phone. I can't, their face is in the phone. I can't work with them. They're always in the phone. And not really ever asking why they were on their phone or what they were doing. Yes, there are videos and YouTube and social media, but a lot of times I've noticed and realized that they were on their phone because there wasn't any engagement. But also they were on their phone studying for national registry. So as you're passing by, as members would pass by and see a new member on their phone, they may not always be specifically on social media or quote unquote having fun. There were a lot of members that were studying, going over different notes and things of that nature on their phone. Like Candice said, this is what they're used to. This is where they're at. But if you pass by and just see them on their phone, you jump to that conclusion that they're not interested, or they're looking at a video, or they're looking at other things other than learning, training, and things of that nature. So the stereotypes and biases and vice versa. Just because a new member learned how to tie a knot a certain way in a class doesn't mean that there's a more seasoned member who knows how to do different types of knots or different types of ropes, but you'll have, newer members or younger members say, well, they're doing it the old school way. And I've always been a person to say, I would prefer to have more tools in my tool bag than I can carry. So I want to learn more than one way, as they say, to skin that cat. And so it's just having those talks and not jumping to conclusion and having those biases as we interact with each other.
Perfect. Thank you, Walter. Jason, looks like you and I probably have learned both the old ways and starting to learn the new ways, as we're probably around the same age group. What can you add to this conversation?
Candice and Walter brought up all tremendous points, so I'll just add a couple things to piggyback onto that. Is what do we know about our older firefighters? Well, they have knowledge of the fire service. They also have institutional knowledge of the community and the organization. And of course, they have experience. So when you've got these generations coming in now, and Chief, you said it as the conversation started, there are 4 generations working in many organizations today. That's a lot of value systems to negotiate. And it is incumbent upon department leaders to be able to know their department, know their members, and get everybody to work together as harmoniously as possible. And that really boils down to trust. Everybody has to trust each other. Everybody has to find a path toward that. So one of the strategies to that is to maybe find some common ground between the generations, some things that they can form a relationship over that don't necessarily have to be related to the fire service, just areas of like of history, like of sports, like of car racing or anything like that, where they can form a commonality and begin a discussion that dives into deeper issues later on and gets into maybe training, mentorships, as I know we're going to talk about. All the while, you're forming a trust relationship among the different groups, and that should help to bring those multi-generational folks together.
All right, very well. That's a great segue into our next question, and I'll throw it right back to you, Jason, if you want to start us off. What are some of the strengths that each generation brings, and how can we best leverage these strengths to help the department thrive?
So if you have 4 generations, baby boomers, Gen X's, millennials, Gen Zs or Xboxers, whatever we're calling them now, a lot of different groups to figure out and put together. So what we know of what we know of the last couple generations to come through is, and one of the biggest things of that is Candice pointed that out, is they want to balance family, work, and fire department. Whereas the baby boomers certainly were more traditionalists, were more about, work was kind of the primary thing, the primary objective. Today's groups are, or not the Gen Z yet, but the 2 generations before them are more about family, right? And trying to balance both. So as a recruiter, we have to be able to allow them to bring that family in, and how we're going to balance, how we're going to work with them to balance that family life, to balance that work life, so that they're not missing games, right? Candice said it. Are you going to make a choice between fire department or family? Most people are going to probably choose family, which means the fire department suffers. So we have to find a balance for that. We have to find their ability to get them to potentially serve on some committees where they can do some work after hours, even at home, where they can get some things done that allow them to find more time for that. It's not to say that the calls aren't important. We need people to do that. We've got to figure out how to mix that in. This latest generation, Gen Z or Xboxers, they don't know a world without the internet. They don't know a world without technology. So when I see those folks come into our organization, they're all about bringing technology in right away. Hey, we got a recruiting idea, but We want to put it on social media. We want to put it on TikTok. And you get some of the older generations that take a step back from that and have some issues with it. And that becomes a communication piece. That becomes also a leadership piece, is explaining what those things are. They bring a lot of that technology savvy stuff into it because that's how they've grown up. That's the world that they know. And then of course, the older generation bring in that experience and that knowledge, but that's really where the passing the torch, if you will, mentorship programs, which I know we're going to get into a little later, really come into play. I think it boils down to really two things: communication and leadership. We have to have open communication. We have to have our leadership, our chief officers that have a pulse on the department and are keeping track of everything and are ensuring that these groups are working together as best they can.
Excellent. Walter, anything to add on how to leverage those strengths to your department?
Definitely. So in leveraging, Jason hit on the head, it's the technology, staying current and relevant with technology, whether that be in the station and more specifically to recruitment and retention. The Gen Zs, they have it, they're on it. They have the TikTok, they know the latest trends, they create those trends. And so if you have those volunteers or you have those members in your department, you definitely want to try and leverage their knowledge to advance and help your station stay relevant and current. TikTok is people when, oh wow, I'm dating myself. So I actually turned 48 on the 22nd. And I think I'm staying current and fresh and up on everything. But also have 3 daughters that, know everything. I have a 16-year-old who is on everything. And I thought, they helped me to stay current and relevant and not so timid of those. And so if you have those young folks in your department, you definitely need to utilize and leverage them and not be timid, be open-minded to things that are fresh and out there right now. And like Jason also said, utilizing your transitioning members, from those older members that are moving from an operational standpoint, more into leadership or even possible trainers, so maybe they can't run the calls that they used to run, utilize their strengths in being trainers, in helping you engaged. If there's a call that goes out to the station, you have the active members who leave, and sometimes you have new members that are sitting in the station for 2 to 3 hours waiting for people to come back. And so if you're able to utilize possibly those members that are transitioning from an active to an inactive role to come by the station and still be in the station, now you have that opportunity for those 2 to 3 hours possibly to have and leverage knowledge, experience. Hey, let's go pry a door. Hey, let's go work on drills and things of that nature. Even though there is a call and maybe the new member is not able to respond to that call. And utilizing both ends works.
All right, thank you. Candice, we did have a question come in from the group. So I know you've got something to say, but I'd also like to throw this question at you. The question is what about when most of the volunteer fire company is related? Does that come into play when we're looking at different generations? We know from the NVFC studies that young people get involved with fire departments when they were part of it growing up or spent time in the building or had a family member. So if you don't mind, take a stab at that as well.
Sure. So to talk about leveraging the strengths between the younger and the older generation, one of the things that I try to encourage is how can we use their strengths? One, we know the older generation, they're very skilled and knowledgeable. The younger generation has technology skills. So why can't we use the younger generation to film the older generation carrying out a training activity, and then to put that, somewhere on the department website or a place where other people can watch those training videos, because that shows the seasoned members that there's a technology can be used for a benefit, and it shows the younger generation, again, it's an opportunity for them to see the older generation sharing those skills. So that's kind of, to kind of tie that innovation together in that history is one thing that I like to recommend for people to do, to use those younger folks to kind of capture that in different ways. And the question that came in, what happens when most of the volunteer fire company is related? That's a great question. For me, I was a first generation firefighter, volunteer firefighter. So I walked in and it's like, oh, everybody's related here. So it does make it a little bit hard because you do kind of feel like an outcast at first, because you're not familiar with the acronyms, you're not familiar with the things. And I think that's where mentoring is very important. And that we remember as new people come in to kind of make sure that they do feel welcome, take them under their wing. And as we recruit and we go out in the community, we make sure that everybody knows that there's a place for them in the fire department, whether that be running calls, emergency services calls, or doing the behind the scenes kind of work, the administrative stuff. There's a role for everybody. So I think, again, and I'm not sure if, sometimes we hear about when people are related, people will say, oh, well, they just got promoted because they're related to this person, or they just got this opportunity because of that. So I think, again, that is where it's important for volunteer fire departments to write job descriptions that include, if you're going to move into the lieutenant spot, or if you're going to be a fire prevention officer, here's the requirements, here's the educational, the skills that you need. That way you can, do those things fairly.
Jason, anything to add on the people being related on a department? It can be, like as Candice said, it can be a bit of a hurdle at times, especially with new people coming through the door. Are there advantages? What do you think of that?
There's a lot of, I'm seeing less and less of that in my travels. I'm a third generation firefighter, but I grew up in a very small town that has where the fire service, when I grew up, was the centerpiece of the town. It was literally in the center of town. Now that has changed. The town has gotten larger. The fire station that was there in the center of town has moved out to an outlying part, and it's kind of broken away from that sense of community. The community demographic shift has definitely affected recruiting. We're not seeing that generation. I would say that's more of a problem than anything, is that we're not seeing more of family and generations coming into the fire service as much as we used to. But if that is, Candice raises a good point. It's all about inclusion. It's all about making people feel welcome. This is a volunteer organization. If I don't feel welcome, what's going to keep me coming back? We say we want to recruit people. We say we don't have enough recruits, but then when the new people come in, we form this inner circle clique, and it's surrounded by a wall, and we don't always let people in the way we should, which of course, if, especially, this newer generation is not built in a way where they're going to tolerate that, maybe like the older ones are. They're going to walk out the door and they're not going to come back. So it's all about, making people feel welcome and involved in the organization as early as possible.
We have to understand these, people are volunteering their time. They actually could be doing something else with their time, and they chose to volunteer, not drafted. They chose to come into the station. And when there is any type of resistance, whether it be more specifically on the negative side, it's really easy for them to pull chalks and leave. And then we, as the members sometimes on the inside say, well, they weren't here for the right reasons. And maybe your reasons, and this is another thing I think generation-wise, is we have to understand that the reasons why you joined may not be the reasons why they are joining now.
All right, thank you. So we did have another question come in. Walter, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, we know a video is worth 1,000,000. So I think I know how you may answer this next question, but if stations are closed to the public right now because of the pandemic, and we know that getting people in the door, especially young people, and exposing them to what we do and what we're about, how do you, if the doors aren't open when the weather's nice, how can we reach out to the community and share that message of recruitment?
Oh man, social media. Social media is probably the easiest way. And walking around and just doing a station tour and showing people things on a squad or on a truck. Very short. You can do it very specific. You don't have to do an hour-long tour or a webinar. Just simply say, hey, today we're going to go out and look at the truck, and we're going to show you some things on the truck, or we're going to show you some things on the squad. We're going to show you dinner tonight, and just very short clips that bring people in and let them see your station and your department, because that's what they want. That's what they want to see. I mean, think about the videos that we do stop and look at, or the ones that we do scroll past. It's about, the quick engagement. I want to see something that's going to interest me. So the trucks and things on the truck, we see the truck itself. We know what a fire truck looks like, but go inside that truck, lift up the, peek behind that curtain and show them tools and things of that nature. That's what they want to see. They want to see how do firefighters eat? What do they eat? Do they order out every day? Where do they sleep? So doing short videos, short clips like that, and it doesn't even have to be a video. You can do a photo montage and just show, where you guys are, what people are doing and where they're living. I think that would definitely break open that mode and help folks that whose stations aren't open right now still continue to be fresh and recruit.
All right. Jason, there are many things a department can do, both from the leadership perspective and by members, to encourage intergenerational cooperation and teamwork. These may include mentorship programs, adapting training to meet different learning styles, fostering a culture of inclusivity into the department. Can you talk about these and other solutions a department can consider?
So mentorship programs, I'm a firm believer in. I think they are, in the corporate world, they are successful a vast majority of the time. And I know they're difficult to initiate if you haven't started one yet. It takes some groundwork. It takes a commitment from the leadership of the department to make a mentorship program. They really have to buy into it. They have to be supportive of it. And of course, you need to find the right mentors to do it, but that is a perfect opportunity to engage older firefighters, the older generation, in that process where you're allowing them to pass on. The program should be set up in a specific way with a format, but you're allowing that individual, that mentor, to pass on institutional knowledge. I hear that a lot is, well, they don't know the history of the community and the department. And how can they understand why we operate if they don't know it? And that's 100% correct. They don't know it. So here's an opportunity then to share that with them and take them through that the fire station didn't always look like this. Maybe it was down the road. Maybe it was in a different building. We've added on these things. We've added on. And then that brings up, of course, technology with the younger generation, because anybody that's used a first generation Hearst tool knows that they are way different than they were 20 years ago when they first came out, right? They were heavy and bulky, and you almost needed 3 people to operate one, maybe 2. But now the technology is a lot better in everything that we do, and that you can bring in the younger generation into the fold with the technology piece. The formula, personally, I don't think it's complicated. It just takes commitment and dedication from everybody, including, and most importantly, department leadership, to make it work, to ensure that cross-generationally people are working together. I'm the chair of recruitment and retention, and I have, all the generations are represented on the committee. At least one member from each, and an officer, and that's really important because we can talk about a lot of things, and as we come up with different ideas to recruit, which we've been doing pretty good the last few years, and also different ideas and how we can do better at the retention piece, and which is really a lot of our retention work has been about events, department events where we can bring everybody together, all the members, all the families, some sort of shared interests that draw the groups together so that we aren't just doing it on meeting nights or at calls. We're doing it also in some regard socially, if you will. It just gets people to become familiar and know each other. And that's also, you know, sometimes a missing piece is we just don't know who we're talking to.
All right, thank you. Candice, you're on the cutting edge of some pretty exciting online training programs. Our department just finished up our TIMS. That was our second training session of the month. We had our hands-on, and then we also had our online. And TIMS is a wonderful program. Appreciate your work on that. Can you dive a little deeper into the training issue? How do we get, you know, those older folks? We know they're going to be a little bit more resistant to that online training, but online training is built to a standard. And we're really split. We've got the young folks who have no issue at all with that online training. But where do we find the balance in our training programs?
Yeah, great question. So, you know, I always recommend that you can have both. So for example, let's say you're rolling out, and I'll go to the extrication tool because we talked about that, a new extrication tool. So you could create an online video or, you know, a link that you send out to members that they can watch in advance, and which would save them time. They could do that with their family, and then they could come in and just kind of get signed off on the skills, you know, practice it, they're signed off. And now some of the people that are not as familiar with that technology, again, you could say, okay, an hour before we do sign-offs on the drill, we're going to have a classroom session on this tool, because you do need to accommodate both and be sensitive to that. Yeah. And, you know, and I think that's where, you know, it goes again, accommodating different people's learning styles. So I think, you know, it's important to be able to offer both, just like, you know, like you mentioned, the TIM training, you know, we go out and we teach that in person. And we also have the, you know, respondersafety.com online platform as well. So I think offering that balance is important.
All right, thank you. Walter, let's shift gears now, look at recruitment. It is important to recruit younger members to the fire service as they are the future of our departments. While at the same time, older, more established community members may have more time to volunteer and can be an asset to the department as well. What are some considerations we need to think about when recruiting members of different generations in terms of messaging, how we reach them, and what roles they can play in the department's success?
Wow, great question. Looking at Gen Z, millennials specifically, I think leadership and departments need to be aware and keep in mind, kind of like what I said earlier, is their reasoning for volunteering, right? And so we understand that it's giving back to the community, and it's helping your community and learning different skills. But the Gen Z millennial, you know, you have to remember and be considerate and understand that they also have the what's in it for me aspect of it, and not from a negative standpoint of, well, what's in it for me before I do anything, but you know, how is this going to benefit me as well? And so volunteering my time, they are also looking to get something out of it. And so that could be coaching, mentoring. That's going to be the skills, the national certifications, resume building. You know, I've seen a lot of departments say, well, they're just here to add it to their resume. Well, that's part of that generation. It's part of our generation too, is we do things intern and experience to add things to our toolbox and to our resumes. And so if we start maybe taking a different approach to, let's just say, well, they're just here to put it on our resume. Well, yeah, if we treat them well and they learn, you know, that could possibly turn into a positive recruitment tool for us, you know, is they're putting it on their resume. And if we interact with them well and treat them well, then they most likely will stay, and it's on their resume, and, you know, they can still move forward in whatever track that they want to move. But I think sometimes we have to truly look at and understand and take in account that some of the, you know, that what's in it for me is not always a bad thing. And I would also say the second thing would be the interview process. You know, the younger generations ask questions now during interviews. And so be prepared to answer those questions. And again, some of it may be geared and sound like, well, what's in it for me type questions. And again, don't look at that as a negative.
I want to tag on to that real quick. So I want to remind people not to forget to recruit older generations, because I recruited my grandma in her 70s into the fire service. So when she was growing up, she was told women couldn't be in the fire service, and she always wanted to be a firefighter. So she got her first set of turnout gear at 72, I think she was. And obviously she wasn't doing structural firefighting, but she was able to join Fire Corps and work on our rehab unit. So, when you're looking at developing those messages, don't forget about reaching our seasoned generation as well, because there's a job for everybody.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. Jason, you've got somebody knocking on your door and they're, let's say, 60 years old, and you've got somebody else knocking on the door the next day and they're in their 20s. How do you modify your message to those different generations when you're looking at recruitment? What's your game plan?
So that 60-year-old, perhaps he or she aren't interested at all in getting on that red truck and going into a burning building. Maybe their interests lie elsewhere. One of the things that my department specifically has struggled with that we've been working hard on is the ability to open up that support level membership for people. And it's not really a generational thing. It's more of anybody that wants to come in and serve a role within the organization that not necessarily has to do with being on the highway at an extrication or fighting a fire, or they just want to help out. They just want to be a service to the department and the community. So it's an incumbent upon us as an organization to have a place for that person, to say, you are absolutely, please come in. Let's talk about what you want to do. And maybe they can bring in something that other members don't have. Maybe they have an accounting background. Maybe they have a background in chemistry. They could help teach hazmat. They don't necessarily have to be a responder, but that would be an individual that could help develop a training program for hazmat. Or we always talk about committee work in the volunteer fire service, that we're not only responding to calls, but we're also serving on committees, and we're asking the same 15, 25 people to do all the work. That's what it seems like is happening. We'll get them onto a committee and have them serve that way, and then alleviate some of that pressure from the other members. So finding a place for them is really important. And of course, they have to feel included right away in everything. I'm not discounting that. Perhaps they don't come in with that, I want to ride that big red truck attitude. But once they see how we function, once they see how we operate, because we are including them as much as they can, a year goes by, a year and a half goes by, and they say, you know what, I can do that. I want to do that. I want to try that. And of course, as long as they pass physicals and background and everything, we put them through a Fire 1 class. It happens. It happens all the time. We can't discount that they want to be that. The younger generation, of course, as Walter pointed out to, it's a different conversation, because they may come in right away and say, look, in a year, I don't plan on being here. I'm going to move. I want to have a job wherever. Fine. Okay, great. We do oftentimes get worried about that, because we instantly look at that person and say, I'm going to put time in, but I'm not going to put all the time I would in if you hadn't said that. Right. And that's completely the wrong way to do it. If your fire department, if my fire department is a stepping stone for that individual to go and have a career anywhere else, and they can come back and say, your fire department is where I got my start. It's where I learned about structure and responsibility and other things. That is marketing you can't make up, right? That is messaging that you absolutely can and should use, but you're building a future for them. That's positive attrition, right? We talk about that all the time, positive versus negative attrition. And I would take that all day long. I would continue to do that if that were the case. So not discounting either one of those. They're obviously going to be different conversations, but it's all about inclusion, making them feel welcome, and engaging them as often as we can to what is going on within the multitude of moving pieces that are a volunteer fire organization.
All right, thank you, Jason. Candice, we've got a question from another person up here in snowy Michigan. And I think it's a good one to throw your way. In the world of purchasing turnout gear, which is going up exponentially, trying to replace fire trucks, maybe giving a little stipend to our folks to get them, get that retention piece up there. The elected officials, at least in my world, they're struggling with the prices, they're struggling with the increases. How do we go to those elected officials and say to them, we need to invest in recruitment? If there's a price to it, how do we get them on board? How do we sell them that idea?
So great question. I think it goes back to pushing it back to the elected officials of what the cost savings is for a volunteer fire department. What is the savings that they're saving that community by having volunteers versus a career department? That's a huge saving. So I think that's a good statistic to put back, to those elected officials. Show them how you're saving money by making an investment in turnout gear. For new members, you're saving X, Y, and Z. And I think it's also important to let those elected officials know that if you don't have proper fitting turnout gear and gear for your members, that you're opening yourselves up to, and I hate to say that, but maybe a lawsuit. You look at issuing somebody gear that's 3-4 times, too big for them, and it's falling off, it's getting snagged, it becomes a safety issue. And I always laugh when I joined the fire service, the gloves that I were given were way too big. And I relate it to, it was like putting oven mitts on and trying to do something. So and then once I went to FDIC for the first time and I was fitted for proper gloves, I'm like, wow, I can actually do things. So it does become a safety thing. So I think one, kind of scaring those elected officials with, hey, we're jeopardizing the safety of our new recruits by not providing them with proper fitting gear. And two, here's what volunteer firefighters save our community.
All right, thank you. Walter, got a question that came in specifically for you.
Okay.
What social media platforms do you recommend? What are best? Maybe that's different per generation. I know when I did my capstone, it was, why are young people not joining the fire service? And that was definitely part of my research project. What platforms are best to reach certain age groups? And then the additional part to that question was, are there certain hashtags that they should be using in that recruitment? And boy, I'd sure like to see something hashtag back to the National Volunteer Fire Council.
Definitely. Oh, wow. So the social media platforms that you should utilize, the top 3 are going to be and again, it really depends on where you're looking. Facebook, LinkedIn, going to be more towards my generation and older seasoned generation, but, also millennials, or excuse me, Gen Z, they're out there on the LinkedIn sites as well. And Facebook is still a very useful one. Of course, Twitter, and right now for the millennials and Gen Z is TikTok. TikTok is king. Anything video, Instagram, anything with video content that you're able to utilize and push video content on is key right now. And so again, there are a lot of different platforms that you can utilize. However, if you're still on MySpace, if you're out there and you're still on MySpace, please give me a call. Please give me a call. We need to talk. We need to talk immediately. But yeah, it's very tricky. But when looking at the pound signs or hashtags and number signs and those types of things, be creative. Definitely be creative and you can come up with your own, and be simple. Join or hashtag join your department. Don't put join your department, put your actual name when you say that. But, very simple hashtag. It doesn't have to be long. It doesn't have to be, super creative. Volunteer today is a great hashtag. Join us today, awesome hashtags, and again, more references, loop it back to NVFC always. But, you want to be creative, but you can also make it really simple. It doesn't have to be, out of the box. And another thing about hashtags and video and content, everything you post, don't expect it to go viral. A lot of people post things and expect, oh, this is going to be the one. We're going to get 1,000 likes and leads are going to come in. Doesn't happen that way. Just be consistent. If you're consistent, the people will come.
All right, I like it. I think one of the greatest hashtags of all time is fire is everybody's fire. I just love that one, especially when you start talking about fire corps and things of that nature. It takes more than the firefighters to pull off what these paid on call and volunteer firefighters do every day. It takes a whole community. So yeah, I really like that one as well. All right, Jason, what are some benefits of overcoming generational differences in the volunteer fire department? How can it positively impact recruitment and retention? So I guess I could kind of maybe sum that one up as what's the perfect storm for us? How do we tie this all together?
I'll go back to communication and leadership, and that's the foundation for everything, not only recruitment and retention, but everything in a well-running, good organization that functions cleanly from top to bottom is communication and leadership. And it's finding those ways to get the cross-generational folks to work together, to be together as often as possible, not just at calls, not just at trainings, not just at meetings, not just social events, is everything together, right? Using those technology tools, using the older generation that may not be familiar with that to show ways how to use equipment. You know, Dr. McDonald talked about that already. It's including everybody in the process. And I think a lot of the friction that we see in our departments when it comes to what we're calling generational issues is that they just don't know each other. They don't know who this person is that just got on their fire engine as a seasoned veteran driver. They turn around and there's this kid or whomever sitting in the officer seat or sitting in the back of the rear, and they don't know who they are. And it can cause problems. So it's incumbent upon, you know, us as older members, us as leaders, senior members, to work to make sure that we're all together and we're all, you know, getting to know each other as best that we can. I mean, and I go back to that old the firehouse was the center of a community model that existed 40, 50 years ago. Was everything happened at those places except Friday night football and wintertime girls and boys high school basketball. Other than that, you know, and that was the community. But if that's not true anymore because of expansion and everything that's been happening in a lot of our places, then we need to do that ourselves. And we need to make sure it's just, I really do. I think it's really just about getting to know each other and becoming familiar, and goes back to that first question that I talked about with the trust of trusting each other and trusting each other and knowing our experience, our knowledge, and what each generation can bring to the table, and then combining all those things together.
All right, Candice, anything to add to that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, the question that I ask everybody that I supervise, all my new officers and everybody, I say, how can I help you be successful? It's a simple question. What do you need from me as a leader to help you be successful? And I think, you know, that's something that as new people come on, that we can ask them that question. What is it you need to be successful? Not just on day one, but continuing to ask that and being genuine about that. You know, I want to circle back to mentoring. I think mentoring is one of the greatest benefits of the two generations coming together. One, it allows knowledge to be passed on. It allows the seasoned generation to leave their legacy, but mentoring has to be done right. You know, my mentor at work was a retired Army drill sergeant. I was terrified of him when they first assigned him to me, but he sat me down and he gave me a career path plan. He said, here's where you want to go, here's the path, and here's what you need to get there. And I'm going to help you do that. And so having that written plan in front of me, and it showed that he was invested in my future. And we can do the same thing with our new firefighters. Is your goal to be fire chief one day? Okay, well, here's what you need. Is your goal to become a paramedic one day? Here's what you need to do. You know, what is it that they want out of their fire service career? Ask them and do that written plan with them, and then link them to the resources that they need to be successful. The other thing with mentoring that it's important, and I always see this with in the fire service, is that we assign a mentor our seasoned person, we get that structure fine. We don't get as many anymore, which is a great thing because we've done a great job with fire prevention. But we get to the fire ground and we don't allow new people that came out of fire school to take the nozzle. Oh, I got this. You can get this next time. And we do the same thing on EMS calls. We get that really bad trauma. We're in the back of the squad. Oh, you know what? Let me get this. I got to do this. But we need to step by. We need to take a step back and let people practice their skills, their new skills, while we're there to guide them. Because then what I see happens is then when that person's put in a position where they have to perform on their own and they make mistakes, we gossip and we talk about them. Oh my gosh, they couldn't even do this. They've been out of school for this long, blah, blah. But it's like, did you allow them the opportunity to practice what they've learned? So I think, again, that mentoring is so important. Being able to allow people to kind of practice their skills, it gives you an opportunity to pass your legacy on.
All right. Walter, a few of the things that Candice talked about sounded a little bit like a performance review. Which can,
A lot.
Yeah, it did. So that can have a negative connotation to it when you start talking about, hey, I want to bring you in once a year or twice a year and talk about, what we can improve on. But how do we make those a positive interaction? I love the thought of, where do you want to be in 5 years? How can I help you get there? So how do we make that shift from maybe we don't call it a performance review, we call it something a little more positive, but what can we focus on while we're doing those to help with that retention piece?
Wow. So me as an Air Force supervisor and the supervisors that I've had, the positive ones and my mentors, the biggest thing was they knew me, right? And so what I mean by that is we didn't just talk or speak or interact when there was something going on. My best supervisors knew me inside and out. They knew, and that was just in conversation. And it's not about going and hanging out. I had supervisors that I couldn't tell you what their home looked like, but we had a really good rapport and relationship at work to where I felt they knew me and they understood me. And that's just open conversations, having conversations with your people. How are your kids doing? Asking and speaking about more than just the job or the shop or training. It's having those interactions, personal interactions in between helps. And so what I mean by that is you also get to know that person, so you can kind of already gauge and see possibly where they want to go or directions. And they also feel comfortable enough to say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this officer class, or I'd like to talk to you about this particular training. And I would like, what does it take for me to get there? And in the fire service, young folks, a lot of them watch to see how the process is, and then they just duplicate the process. So if someone wants to be a paramedic and they say, well, how did you become a paramedic? And that person says, well, I just kind of waited. And then the station asked me, if I wanted to be one. Well, then that person's not going to ask, can I be one? They're going to wait until someone says, hey, do you want to be a paramedic? So we mimic the patterns that we see before us. But as supervisors, if we're able to have that interaction, we can go to somebody, or they feel comfortable enough to say, hey, I'd like to take this particular class or this training. And it just opens up the door to have a better understanding of who your people are. And also, when we talk about in the volunteer service mentorship, I had a conversation with one of my mentors today about it, Tiger. He said you have to be, you have to choose mentors and seasoned folks that, one, are available, accountable, and enthusiastic. Because not everybody should be a mentor, for your specific, they can be, but you also have to coach and teach them how to be mentors. And so just saying, hey, you're going to be a mentor is not enough. You also have to go in and give them the tools to become a mentor.
All right. Speaking of Tiger, you just shot a question out, and I'll hand it over to you, Jason. Some of us have an all-in attitude towards the fire service. And Tiger's kind of leaning towards maybe that some of us, the older generation. How do you deal with the unrealistic expectation that these young people that are just coming into the fire service, is it an unrealistic expectation that they're going to be as all in on the fire service as we are? And if they're not, how do you get the older generation to accept what it is that they can give to the fire service?
You said, Tiger, I'm just getting word from the NVFC that we're shut down for the session. So that's, so yeah, that does come up. In all seriousness, that does come up. So that, I think that requires some delicate conversations with members, especially those members that are expecting a level of commitment that they were able to give, because it is different, and we've already talked about that. It's a different this generation, or these last couple anyway, expect and require to spend more time with their family, more involved with work. So the expectations should be the same, right? The expectations 40 years ago should not have been, you have to spend every waking moment at the firehouse. If those members chose to do that at that particular time, then kudos to them, congratulations to them. But I don't think that was an actual written in policy expectation, nor should it be now, right? We should not expect more of people when they probably have less time to give. We have to find that perfect balance between, you're coming in as a new member, you need Fire One, you need training, you need to go to calls, and we have to work together to balance that. Because one of the things you can easily do with this younger member that doesn't think they have time to give is, Candice talked about this, set a schedule for them, or a professional development plan for them that allows them to grow as an individual and allows them to still do the same things that we need them to do as members, but not to the degree that some older members might expect. And I would just ask then also, I would add that that's the perfect time to bring those groups together and have a department conversation, if you will, about what we expect. Because look, if shame on us as a volunteer organization, if we don't share the expectations for not only new members, but for those that are currently serving, right? We need to do a better job at that.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. Candice, last question. We're going to toss this one to you. Somebody's asking about what kind of incentives, besides PPE, banquets, certificates, what kind of incentives can you give for retention of your members?
So great question. And this is what I would do. I would challenge everybody to go back to their fire department and have a brainstorming session with their members. Ask them that question. What incentives, if we were to develop a incentive strategy, what would you like to see? Is it a gift card to take your family out to dinner? Is it this? Let the members within your own department, your internal stakeholders, come up with that list, because I think they're the ones that can tell you, what it is that they'd like to see. And I've seen different departments do different things as far as for incentives, from gift cards to, again, the shirts, the uniforms, the certificates. But I think it's also important to note that those attaboys go a long way. Being able to really, thank people and thank them publicly or thank them privately, depending on, how they like to be thanked. We need to ask that as well. Are you a person who likes, to be thanked publicly, or do you like that in private? Like my husband's super introverted. He does not want attention at all. So he would be like, nope. Let's have that conversation, quietly. But again, I would, for those incentives, I would ask your internal stakeholders, what is it that they want?
Great idea. All right, it looks like we're just about out of time for now.
I know somebody wants ice cream. I don't know who, but I know somebody would probably say ice cream.
I'm with you. That'll work. Hey, I want to thank our panelists, Jason Decremer, Candice McDonald, and Walter Campbell, and everybody who's joined us live, as well as all volunteer emergency responders for all the work they do. I think we've had a very interesting discussion about how generational cooperation can positively impact recruitment and retention, and hopefully provided at least some ideas and takeaways for your department to use to foster growth and success in your department. I also want to thank the National Volunteer Fire Council for organizing today's discussion. NVFC is the leading nonprofit membership association representing the interests of the volunteer fire, EMS, and rescue services. They provide resources, training, advocacy, and programs to help the volunteer emergency services thrive. This includes the Make Me a Firefighter campaign, which provides free resources and tools to help documents with recruitment and retention. You can learn more about the NVFC and what they do, as well as access resources at nvfc.org. If you're not a member, I want to encourage you to join. It costs just $21 a year and comes with a variety of benefits such as free training in the NVFC virtual classroom, access to the Volunteer Voices member community, and much more. You can learn more at nvfc.org/join. We'll also include in this video's description the links to the NVFC and the Make Me a Firefighter campaign. If we didn't answer your questions, please email the NVFC's communications coordinator, Matthew Odom, at matthew@nvfc.org. Again, thank you and have a good afternoon.